Hey everybody, welcome back to our Luke deep dive. Today we are in Luke chapter 14, and we have three little vignettes that all happen in the same place. Jesus is invited over to the house of a prominent Pharisee, and three different stories or incidences take place, all of which revolve around a very important part of Jewish culture, and that is the socioeconomic and cultural relations that we have with one another. Now, this is something that we don't often think about in Western 21st century culture, but is very important still in a lot of cultures in our world today about who is our neighbor, how do we view and treat one another, especially in social and in cultural settings. In the Jewish world, two things were pretty prominent. One is you often invited people over that you wanted to associate with. And there was kind of this subtle social moving up the ladder as you interacted with important people or special people or religious people or political people. You were kind of moving up the ladder as you associated with those people. And so there was kind of this jockeying and jostling that was happening in a lot of these social settings, so that your rank or your prominence or your position might jump a few places simply by hanging out with the right people. The other aspect of this background is that hosting people and hospitality was a big deal in Jewish culture. When someone was in need, you were expected to invite them in, whether they're a traveler, a stranger, a foreigner, someone who just needed companionship. There was this great emphasis on always having your home open and being welcoming to other people. Now, this would create a tension between those two different social things when, one, you're trying to associate with people that are a little bit maybe above you or more powerful or important than you, and you're trying to jockey and get up the ladder. But then you also have this cultural norm of inviting people who are needy and strangers in. And so what if both things are happening at once? Or what if by welcoming a foreigner or a stranger, you're actually moving yourself down the social ladder? So these things were in constant tension in Jewish culture. And so here we see these things at play in Jesus's ministry. The very first story is Jesus gets invited to the house of a prominent Pharisee, and he's being watched, and he sees a man there who has an abnormal swelling in his body. And it's interesting that this guy's even invited to the party, but he's there, and Jesus uses this as a teaching moment, and he asks a question to the onlooking religious leaders. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? There's a question underlying that question, which Jesus means to ask. What's the purpose of the Sabbath anyway? Why did God create this day of rest? What's that supposed to be about? And no one wants to do anything, because if they indicate that Jesus should reach out and heal this man, then they're kind of violating some social norms where they're associating themselves with this man who obviously has some kind of medical condition, so they're moving down the ladder, but they're also violating some of their Jewish regulations that they put, that you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees kind of put laws on top of laws so that people wouldn't violate the Sabbath, so we would keep the Sabbath day holy. And so Jesus uses this instruction uses this question to reframe how people think about both the cultural social setting and kind of how do we interpret what the Sabbath actually means. He puts his hand on the man, and he heals him and sends him on his way. This is something that would have been looked down on, and people would have been judging him, which Jesus anticipates, and he asks the question, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? And it says they had nothing to say. Now, this is a problem we probably don't have, that on our day of rest, our day off of work, probably the last thing that we're worried about is if one of our oxes falls into a giant hole in the ground. And by pulling him out, we're violating the Sabbath. But as I said before, this is a very big deal about what does it mean to honor God's rules and regulations. And the answer is that they would. These people would. If they had an animal or a child that fell into a pit, they would definitely pull them out because that's the right thing to do. And Jesus is using this example to say, isn't this what the Sabbath is really all about? To welcome people in, to extend love and generosity, and even to do this work of healing. Isn't that what that's for? The Sabbath is to bring life, not to avoid bringing life. That's the first point. And then Jesus goes on and he sees how all these people are jockeying and jostling to get into the important seats at the table. And this is going back to what I said earlier, that you want to associate yourself with the most important or more important people in the room. And so you're going to try to sit closer to that end of the table. And Jesus, again, reframes this kind of social norm that's happening. And he says, instead of trying to get yourself in the most prominent position, why don't you put yourself at the end of the table, with all the, where you are in the lowest position. And then the host who sees you there will move you up and you'll gain honor. Again, this is not something that we probably practice in our 21st century culture, but this was a norm back then. And Jesus, again, makes this point about verse 11. He says, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. He says this is the posture of what it means to be a good citizen and to be obedient to God. That we're here not to try to move ourselves up the social ladder or be more well-known or more popular or whatever. What's the point of that? But actually, our job is to be humble, to put other people first. And then by doing that, we're rewarded, he says. And this is a prominent reversal of that kind of the social norms. And this is what Jesus does throughout Luke. He takes things that society and people value and he flips them on their head. So instead of trying to put yourself at the highest position, put yourself at the lowest. That's a great reversal. And then he ends with one little bit which I find really amazing and challenging. He says, if you give a lunch or put on a lunch or a dinner, don't just invite your friends or your brothers or sisters or relatives or your rich neighbors, because if you do, they'll invite you back and you'll be repaid. It all works out as a system equals, right? I invite you over, you invite me over, and it all balances out. You get your reward in the here and now. But he says, when you have a banquet, instead invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. He says, although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is, again, a flipping of these social norms. Instead of inviting those prominent people over, those people that you want to schmooze or whatever, or even the people that you like, why don't you invite the people that are on the fringes, the people that don't often get invited? Again, this is this great reversal that Jesus is showing here. Because they can't do anything for you. It's not like these people who are poor are going to then invite you over to a banquet at their house, because they can't. And Jesus makes this point that we're called to not just think about the here and now, and we do things so that we get rewarded now, socially, culturally, personally, but to think about the next life, the kingdom, that we're doing these things for a greater purpose, and we get repaid. God sees what we do, even though we can't get repaid for the way that we serve or give or show generosity. God sees it, and God will reward us. And the challenge, I think, in this is that I don't see a lot of Christians doing this today. In fact, it's not something I often think about doing. And this is one of those passages that we often will read and will say, this doesn't really apply. I'm not supposed to take this seriously. It's just kind of an idea of I should be more generous. But that's not what this says. It actually says, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed. It doesn't just say, we'll invite other people over that you don't normally associate with. It says these particular groups of people. Why? Well, because they're the marginalized. They're the ones who are left out. They're the ones who are often isolated, alone, stigmatized, ostracized. And Jesus makes this particular point, not just to invite other people other than your friends and relatives over, but people in society that are on the fringes. That we, as Christians, a core characteristic of our faith should be generosity and hospitality to those who cannot repay us, to those who are often forgotten in society, those who are at the very bottom, whether that's because of their socioeconomic status or physical status or social status. And so the challenge for you and I is, who is that? Do we know those people? Do we go out into our world and purposely look for those people that are lonely, that are poor, that are unwell, and we do our best to invite them in, to befriend them, to show them the love and generosity of God? Why do we do this? Well, because we were in that same state, and this is what Jesus did for us. And so the challenge isn't just to be more hospitable or be more generous, although those are really good things, but how can you be hospitable and generous to those people in particular that have very little or nothing? What does it look like to open your eyes to the needs of those around you rather than just live this kind of comfortable life that we often live on the northern beaches? It's a massive challenge. And yet, when Jesus says this, he says, you will be blessed. God sees what you do. You'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And to me, that is a challenge worth undertaking. I'll leave you with that, and we'll see you next time. Bye.